History remembers the clash of empires, the rise and fall of kings, and the thunder of cannons. It's a story written in bold letters, chronicling grand battles and political maneuvers. We learn about sultans and emperors, about the siege of Vienna, and the fall of Constantinople. But what about the stories that were never written down? The histories that weren't burned in a library fire, but simply faded away because no one thought to record them. This is one of those stories. It's the story of Christian nuns living under the vast and powerful Ottoman Empire. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire was a complex mosaic of cultures, religions, and peoples. While its policies towards non-Muslims, or dhimmis, are often debated by historians, it is clear that life for Christians and Jews was a world away from that of their Muslim neighbors. They were a protected, but subordinate, class. We have records from this time tax documents, court proceedings, and the writings of patriarchs and bishops. These sources tell us a lot about the official, male-dominated structures of the church. They tell us about the monasteries filled with monks who copied manuscripts, engaged in theological debates, and managed church properties. But what about the women? What about the nuns? Where are their voices in this grand historical narrative? If you search for the history of nuns in the Ottoman Empire, you will find a near-deafening silence. It's a silence that is both profound and puzzling. We know they existed. Scattered references appear in travelers' accounts and in the margins of church documents. We hear of convents in bustling cities like Istanbul and quiet villages in the Balkans and Anatolia. We know they were there, living lives of prayer, work, and devotion. So why is their history a virtual blank page? The answer is complicated. It's a story of erasure, not by force, but by neglect. The history of men, especially powerful men, was considered the history that mattered. The chronicles were kept by men, for men. The day-to-day life of a community of religious women, that wasn't seen as history. It was domestic, it was private, it was female. Their world was enclosed, not just by the physical walls of their convents, but by the societal walls that kept women out of the public and historical record. Let's try to piece together what their lives might have been like, using the fragments we have. A typical convent would have been a self-sufficient community. The nuns would have followed a strict routine of daily prayer, starting before dawn and continuing throughout the day. Their lives were structured around the liturgical calendar, marking the feasts and fasts of the Orthodox or Catholic faith. But prayer was only one part of their existence. They also had to work to survive. They would have cultivated gardens to grow their own food, kept bees for honey and wax for candles, and raised chickens for eggs. Many convents were known for their handicrafts. Nuns would spin wool, weave cloth, and create intricate embroidery. These weren't just hobbies. They were essential economic activities. The beautiful vestments worn by priests, the altar cloths, the icons adorned with delicate needlework. Much of this was the product of countless hours of labor by unseen female hands. Selling these goods provided a meager income, enough to buy what they could unproduce themselves, and to pay the various taxes levied upon them by both the Ottoman state and their own church hierarchy. Their convents also served as vital centers of their communities. They were often the only places where girls could receive some form of education. Nuns would teach them to read, write, and, most importantly, to understand their faith. In a world where formal education for women was virtually non-existent, these convents were precious beacons of literacy and culture. They also acted as makeshift hospitals and shelters. Nuns cared for the sick, took in orphans, and provided refuge for widows or women escaping difficult situations. They were the social safety net. In a society that often had none, they were the quiet pillars holding their communities together. Yet, their existence was precarious. They were doubly marginalized as Christians in a Muslim empire, and as women in a patriarchal world. They had to navigate complex legal and social structures. Property ownership was a constant struggle. Legally, the convent's property might be registered under the name of a male bishop or a local monastery, leaving the nuns with little legal control over the very land they lived on and worked. This dependency made them vulnerable. A change in leadership, a dispute with a local official, or a simple economic downturn could threaten their very existence. Think about the psychological toll. Living as a small, enclosed community of women, surrounded by a society that often viewed them with suspicion or indifference. They were visible, yet invisible. Their distinctive habits marked them as different, yet their lives and contributions were largely ignored. The courage it must have taken to maintain their faith, their traditions, and their way of life in such an environment is staggering. They weren't warriors swinging swords, but their resilience was a battle fought every single day. A battle of faith against uncertainty, of community against isolation, of perseverance against obscurity. So why does this forgotten history matter today? It matters because it challenges our very definition of history. It forces us to look beyond the battlefield in the throne room and into the quiet corners where most of life actually happens. It reminds us that history is made not just by generals and sultans, but by ordinary people living lives of extraordinary resilience. The story of these nuns is the story of women everywhere whose labor, faith, and contributions have been overlooked and undervalued. By searching for these lost voices, we are doing more than just filling in a blank spot in a textbook. We are restoring dignity to these women. We are acknowledging their existence, their struggles, and their triumphs. We are recognizing that their quiet lives of prayer and work were, in their own way, acts of profound historical significance. They preserved their culture, educated children, cared for the sick, and held their communities together through centuries of change and upheaval. Theirs is not a history of grand monuments, but of countless, small, daily acts of faith and survival. Their legacy isn't carved in stone. It's woven into the fabric of the communities they served. It lives on in the traditions they passed down, in the faith they nurtured, and in the very idea that a life of quiet devotion can be a powerful force for good in the world. Reclaiming their story is a reminder that the most powerful histories are sometimes the ones that were never meant to be told. They are the whispers we have to lean in close to hear. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into a forgotten past. If you found this story as compelling as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history. Let me know in the comments what other forgotten histories you'd like to see explored. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever wondered what happens when a massive empire, built on a different faith, conquers lands where another religion has thrived for centuries? That is exactly the story we re-dive into today, the epic tale of the Ottoman Empire and its relationship with Christianity. Their story is one of conquests, governance, and a fascinating, complex interaction between Muslims and Christians. How did this mighty Islamic empire rule over millions of Christians? This was a world dotted with ancient churches, monasteries, and a deeply ingrained Christian culture. But by the 13th century, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self, weakened by internal conflicts and external pressures. Most notably the Fourth Crusade, which saw Western Christians sack Constantinople in 1204. This created a power vacuum. Into this void stepped a group of Turkish tribes led by a chieftain named Osman I. Their success was built on several key factors. Militarily, they had the formidable Janissaries, an elite infantry unit made up of young Christian boys taken from the Balkans, converted to Islam, and trained to be fiercely loyal to the Sultan. This system, known as the Devshirme, was controversial, but it created one of the most effective fighting forces of the era. Politically, the early Ottomans were pragmatic. Instead of simply destroying the structures of the states they conquered, they often absorbed them, adapting Byzantine administrative practices and even employing Christian officials. This allowed for a smoother transition of power and helped them govern their rapidly growing division. The early expansion was swift. By the late 14th century, they had crossed into Europe, defeating Serbia. Mehmed the Conqueror established what would become known as the Millet system. This was a unique form of governance that allowed religious minorities a degree of autonomy. The word millet comes from the Arabic word for nation. Under this system, the vast Orthodox Christian population was organized into the Rum Millet, or the Roman nation, and not to their Byzantine or Eastern Roman heritage. This millet was led by the Patriarch of Constantinople, who was appointed by the Sultan. Patriarch wasn't just a religious leader. He was a civil one, too. He had authority over his community in matters of marriage, divorce, inheritance, and education. He could collect taxes from his flock to maintain churches, schools, and hospitals. In essence, as long as the Christian communities paid their taxes and remained loyal subjects of the Sultan, they were allowed to run their own internal affairs and practice their faith. This system was extended to other non-Muslim groups as well, like the Armenian Christians and the Jewish community, who were also given their own millets, with their own leaders. This pragmatic approach was a key reason for the Ottoman Empire's stability and longevity. It allowed a Muslim ruling class to govern a vast, multi-ethnic, multi-religious population without constant rebellion. However, it's crucial to understand that this was not a system of modern equality. Non-Muslims, known as dhimmi, or protected people, had a second-class status. And predictable than it had been under the feuding Christian lords of the late Byzantine period. The image of Ottoman officials taking children from their homes left a lasting scar on the collective memory of these communities. The Ottoman government began to view them with increasing suspicion, seeing them as a potential fifth column allied with foreign enemies. At the same time, ideas of nationalism, born from the French Revolution, began to seep into the Balkans. It showed that it was possible to break away from the empire. The Ottoman government responded with attempts at reform, known as the Tanzimat. These reforms aimed to modernize the empire and create a new sense of shared Ottoman identity, or Ottomanism, that would transcend religious and ethnic divisions. The jizya tax was abolished, and in theory, all subjects were declared equal before the law. But it was too little, too late. The forces of nationalism were too powerful to contain. This event, widely recognized by historians as the Armenian Genocide, resulted in the deaths of up to The old Millet system, which had managed diversity for centuries, had completely broken down under the pressures of modern nationalism and total war. The Turkish heartland itself was occupied, leading to the Turkish War of Independence, led by Mustafa Kemal. Around 1.5 million Orthodox Christians were forced to leave their ancestral homes in Turkey, while 500,000 Muslims were expelled from Greece. This event effectively ended the multi-religious, multi-ethnic character of Anatolia that had defined it for centuries. The story of the Ottoman Empire and its Christian subjects is a powerful lesson in history. It shows us that relationships between different religious groups are never simple. They can be a story of pragmatic coexistence, mutual benefit, and cultural exchange. But they can also be a story of discrimination, suspicion, and ultimately, horrific violence. The legacy of the Ottomans is all around us in the borders of the modern Middle East, in the Balkans, in the magnificent architecture of Istanbul, and in the complex identities of the peoples who once lived under the Sultan's rule. Thank you for joining us on this journey through a crucial period of history. If you found this exploration fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. What other historical topics would you like to see us cover? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. When we think of the Ottoman Empire, we often picture this vast, powerful state, a melting pot of cultures and religions. For centuries, Muslims, Christians, and Jews all lived under the rule of the Sultan. Historians often talk about Ottoman tolerance, this idea that different communities coexisted peacefully, and in many ways, they did. But what did this tolerance actually mean in daily life? Was it the same as equality? Today, we go into peel back the layers of this complex society and look at it through a unique lens, the lives of Christian nuns. These women were a fascinating group. They had made a profound choice to dedicate their entire existence to their faith. Life in a convent was structured and demanding. It revolved around a strict schedule of prayer, contemplation, and service. Nuns took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, renouncing personal wealth, marriage, and individual desires. Their world was the convent, their family was their sisterhood, and their ultimate authority was the church. Now, within their own Christian communities, nuns were often revered figures. They were seen as pillars of piety and morality. Many also played a crucial role in society, running schools, orphanages, and hospitals. They were the caregivers, the educators, the spiritual guides for their people. They provided a social safety net that was vital, especially for the poor and the sick. But their position, their very safety, was tied directly to the standing of the Christian church as a whole. And this is where the Ottoman context becomes so important. Under Ottoman law, Christians and Jews were considered dhimmi, or protected peoples. This status granted them the right to practice their religion, manage their own community affairs, and have a degree of legal autonomy. It was a system that allowed for the empire's incredible diversity. However, this protection came at a price. DIE communities paid a special tax, the jizya, and were subject to a set of social and legal restrictions. They were, by definition, second-class subjects. For example, Christians couldn't build new churches without permission, which was rarely granted. Their existing churches couldn't have bells that rang too loudly. In legal disputes with Muslims, a Muslim's testimony often carried more weight. These weren't necessarily rules to oppress, but to maintain a clear social hierarchy with Muslims at the top. The empire's stability, in the eyes of its rulers, depended on everyone knowing their place. So, how did this affect our nuns? Well, their convents were part of the church's property and infrastructure. As long as the local Christian community was stable and could pay its taxes, the convents were generally left alone. The nuns could continue their lives of prayer and service, protected by the dhimmi status of their community. Their lives were, in a way, insulated. But this insulation was fragile. Their world was small and self-contained, but it wasn't immune to the larger forces shaping the empire. And the Ottoman Empire wasn't static. It was constantly changing. Over the centuries, its fortunes rose and fell. There were periods of immense prosperity and stability, and then there were times of war, rebellion, and economic crises. During these turbulent times, the delicate balance of intercommunal relations could be easily upset. When the central government was strong, it could enforce the dhimmi protections and keep a lid on any local conflicts. But when its authority weakened, especially in the provinces far from Istanbul, local governors, military commanders, or even rival factions might see non-Muslim communities as easy targets. Suddenly, the protections that seemed so solid could evaporate. Let's imagine a scenario. Aloka Pasha needs money to fund his troops. The central treasury is slow to send funds. He might look at the local Christian community and decide to levy an extra, unofficial tax. The church, and by extension the convents, would be expected to contribute. Refusal could be seen as defiance, leading to serious consequences. The nuns, having taken a vow of poverty, owned nothing personally. The convent's assets belonged to the church, making them vulnerable whenever the church was pressured. Or consider a property dispute. A piece of land owned by a convent for generations might suddenly be claimed by a powerful local Muslim family. In a legal system that favored Muslims, proving ownership could be incredibly difficult, if not impossible. The loss of land meant the loss of income from farming or rent, which was often essential for the convent's survival. This could be a slow, grinding process that gradually eroded the economic foundation of these religious houses. The vulnerability of nuns was also deeply gendered. As women in a patriarchal society, they had limited agency to begin with. Their security was almost entirely dependent on male-led institutions, the church hierarchy and the Ottoman state. When those institutions failed them, they had very few options. They couldn't just pack up and move. They couldn't appeal to a higher secular authority on their own. Their entire lives were invested in a single place, a single community. This is a key point to understand. The Ottoman system of tolerance was not based on a modern ideal of individual rights. It was a system of collective rights granted to communities. As long as your community, your millet, as it was called, fulfilled its obligations, you were protected. But if the community as a whole fell out of favor, or if the system itself started to break down, every individual within it became vulnerable. As the Ottoman Empire began its long decline from the 18th century onwards, these pressures intensified. The rise of nationalism in the Balkans created new tensions. Christian communities, inspired by ideas from Europe, began to agitate for more rights and even independence. The Ottoman state, feeling threatened, often responded with crackdowns. In this volatile atmosphere, the old lines between communities hardened. Suspicion replaced coexistence. During the Greek War of Independence in the 1820s, for example, Orthodox Christians across the empire, even those far from Greece, fell under suspicion. Clergy was sometimes targeted, and church properties were seized. Nuns in Orthodox convents would have felt this pressure intensely. Their loyalty was questioned simply because they shared a faith with the rebels. Their lives, once dedicated to quiet prayer, were now caught up in a geopolitical storm. It's a stark reminder that historical tolerance is a complex and often conditional thing. It's not a switch that's either on or off. It's a dynamic relationship, constantly negotiated and subject to the political and economic pressures of the time. The story of the Ottoman nuns shows us the human side of this. It reveals the precariousness of a life lived at the intersection of faith, gender, and imperial politics. Their story isn't one of constant persecution. There were long stretches of peace and normality, but their security was never guaranteed. It was a privilege, not a right, and it depended on a delicate web of relationships that could be torn apart by forces far beyond their control. It's a story of faith and fragility, of community and vulnerability, all playing out on the grand stage of a fading empire. Thanks for watching. If you found this glimpse into a lesser-known corner of history interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Let us know in the comments what other hidden histories you'd like us to explore. See you next time. Imagine a world where the loudest sound is the gentle rustle of a habit, the soft turn of a page, or a whispered prayer. This was the world of the convent. For centuries, these institutions were sanctuaries, offering women a life of purpose and peace, far removed from the often turbulent outside world. Life within these walls was structured and predictable, revolving around a rhythm of prayer, work, contemplation, and service. It was a life dedicated to God, a life of profound spiritual commitment. But it was also something more. For many women, the convent was a refuge. In an age where a woman's fate was often decided by her family, where marriage was a transaction, and personal choice was a luxury few could afford, the convent offered a radical alternative. It was a way to escape an unwanted marriage, to pursue an education, to live a life of the mind and spirit that was otherwise denied to them. It was a space where women could be scholars, artists, musicians, and leaders, free from the direct control of fathers, brothers, or husbands. They were brides of Christ, and in that divine marriage, they found a unique form of autonomy. This quiet strength, however, was built on a foundation that was beginning to crack. The power of the convent was deeply intertwined with the power of the church. As long as the church held significant sway over political and social life, the convents and the women within them were protected. Their lands were secure, their rights were respected, and their spiritual authority was recognized. But history is a relentless tide, and the winds of change were beginning to blow. Across Europe, new ideas were taking hold. The Reformation, the rise of secular states, and the Enlightenment all challenged the traditional authority of religious institutions. Kings and princes grew more powerful, consolidating their control and looking upon the vast wealth and land of the church with envious eyes. Slowly but surely, the protective walls around the convents began to crumble, not from the outside in, but from the very foundation up. The political and social structures that had supported them for centuries were being dismantled. This shift left the nuns in a uniquely perilous position. Think about it. They had willingly separated themselves from the traditional networks of power and protection. They had no husbands to speak for them in court, no sons to inherit titles and defend their family's interests, no powerful fathers to negotiate on their behalf. Their family was the church, their protector was the pope, and their influence was spiritual. But what happens when that family is under attack and that protector's voice is being ignored? They became invisible in a world increasingly defined by secular power, political maneuvering, and military might. A community of celibate women dedicated to prayer was easily overlooked. Their lack of direct political connections made them an easy target. When new rulers came to power, looking to seize land and consolidate their authority, the convents were often first on the list. Who was there to stop them? The local bishop might protest, but his power was waning. The pope might issue a decree, but a king could simply ignore it. The very things that had once given them strength, their separation from the world, their reliance on spiritual authority now became their greatest weaknesses. They were isolated, vulnerable, and without a voice in the new corridors of power. The story of the dissolution of monasteries and convents, whether in Tudor England, revolutionary France, or Napoleonic Italy, is a story of this vulnerability laid bare. We often hear about the great battles and the famous kings, but the stories of these women are just as important. They were caught in the crossfire of massive historical changes, their quiet lives of devotion shattered by political ambition. They were dispossessed of their homes, their communities were torn apart, and their way of life was declared obsolete. Some were forced back into a world they had left behind, now without a dowry or family support. Others tried to continue their religious life in secret, facing persecution and danger. The silence of the convent was broken, replaced by the shouts of soldiers and the decrees of bureaucrats. These women, who had no army and no political currency, depended entirely on a system of belief and tradition. When that system was overthrown, they were left with nothing but their faith. Their story is a powerful reminder that institutions are fragile, and that the protections we take for granted can disappear in the blink of an eye. It is a testament to the quiet courage of those who hold on to their convictions when the world around them is falling apart. Their legacy, however, is not one of victory. It is a story of resilience. Even after being scattered, many of these women continued their work in education and healthcare, adapting to new circumstances and finding new ways to serve. The spirit of the convent, that commitment to a life of purpose and service, could not be so easily extinguished. It simply changed its form, flowing into new channels and continuing to shape our world in ways we often don't even realize. The next time you think of history, remember the quiet spaces and the invisible women whose stories are woven into the very fabric of our past. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more hidden histories. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.